response to this question around researchers and teachers in units of social justice histories, to whom are we accountable, has to do with the autonomous and egalitarian sites for learning that we have created and inherited on campuses and off campuses. On my campus, where I teach at UC Irvine, sometimes those spaces are in student services, but not often, unfortunately, because leadership in favor of genuine equity and university accountability to students and community members is often squashed. People who work in student services on my campus are often told to follow their job description and not lead, not intervene, not speak. Student services staff and administrators are often told that faculty are the ones that have priority and should lead the university, and then are pathologized when they insist on leading anyway because problems have to be addressed. So we've started an affinity group on our campus called X Black Women Daily, which has a very pithy, short mission statement that has to do with creating an anti-hierarchical space where we can solve problems together that are particular to Black women on the campus. And so those kinds of things look like dealing with the fact of the burden of problem solving outside of our job description. So you're going to be penalized for solving those problems, but if you don't solve them, you can't even show up to work every day. They have to do with the particular cultural methodologies and stereotypes that we all face across campus, regardless of rank and status, and the kind of hyper-visibility and also hyper-exclusion that happens to Black people in the UC system. They have to do with the heart that each of us has articulated as meeting our community members where they are and mobilizing all of us to build capacity together so it becomes harder to pick us off one by one. It also has to do with our drive for ungeographic, egalitarian, and anti-hierarchical approaches to meeting needs in our communities. So this has been actually really meaningful for addressing the hyper-minoritization of Black students, faculty, and staff in the UC system. And the fact that it's led by Black women, I don't think is incidental or a mistake or anything like that. So that's the first community that I'm accountable to, this affinity group. Another one has to do with a traveling role. So I'm one of the people among this group that doesn't have any official administrative title in the UC system. And yet, as Professor Goldman was just saying, like, oh, you've got jobs for all of us to do while you're here. So the power for me of not having any official administrative title has been that I'm not accountable to anyone at the administrative level, but I can do lots of problem solving. I can work with people to do problem solving, and not the kind of problem solving that the university mandates, because it's not that administrators are coming to me and saying, oh, this is a problem. It's that my peers who are doing activist work are saying, how do we navigate our way through this kind of thing? So I have been in the position of being a quote unquote fixer for graduate students across the system. So faculty and personnel across the system have on different occasions asked me to participate in vexing situations so that bright students have the space to figure out how they want to navigate Blackness and their activism and the stakes of their creativity without being penalized for not knowing how to go along to get along, without being penalized for not having insight about political solidarity, because some of those things are learned. And some of the people who come to the UC system just don't have all the information that they need to have about the history of policy making in the UC or the impact of it on the state as a corporation. And people just mess up all the time. And they burn bridges that they don't need to burn. Right? I'm talking about among activists. You know, we all need good enemies. Not being penalized for not being deferential to movement leaders of the past and the present. Not being penalized for wanting to be mentored by Black faculty and fearing that they won't get to have a real career if they aren't the Black protege or this or that friend of the Negro. I constantly have conversations with Black graduate students throughout the UC system who are really deeply emotionally wrestling with the idea that if they allow themselves to be mentored or trained by a senior Black person, then they're not going to be able to have a career. And I don't know how to convince them that that's not the truth. You know, like I give these path-dependent examples of like, so-and-so was mentored by a Black person, they ended up at Brown, they ended up at Yale, you can have a future too. But there's something attached to the idea of the Black faculty body that makes people really afraid that they're just gonna be shooting themselves in the foot if they actually allow themselves to be taught by a scholar, a Black scholar. Having them not be penalized for having successfully learned to distrust some activist scholars of color. And Fatima alluded to this before, sometimes our scholarship and activism actually doesn't do the work that we think it's doing. So, okay. And finally, them not being penalized for being wholly unassimilated, working class, conscious Black people. Because sometimes people are penalized not for making mistakes and not knowing how to do things well, but they're penalized for knowing how to have a good analysis, and that's the thing that they get targeted for. So the other community that I'm accountable to has to do with national networks and professional associations. So I probably will not chair in my department for a really, really long time, and that has to do with just some ideological differences and just some other kinds of things. But where I have been allowed to lead has to do with national associations that were founded in the same time period as these departments were founded. So in sociology and psychology and social work and political science and literature and anthropology and African studies and Latin American studies, there were these peel-off moments in the late 60s. And so the National Conference of Black Political Scientists is one place where I've tried to create an enormous amount of disruption, barriers for myself and for students, so that students, peers, anybody who wanted to would be able to navigate around, learn how to hack and take over the professional associations, because they have an enormous amount of money. So those of us who do research on professional associations know that they often end up being in position to write federal policy, state level policy. We also know that those associations have deep ties to foundation dollars and foundation resources. So what I'm trying to help people do through my own affiliation with these organizations is to learn how to access those dollars for other kinds of projects. Because one of the things that I've observed is that they don't truly really monitor what the money is doing. They just have to disperse that, they just have to prove that it's been dispersed. The other community that I try to be accountable to is this notion of the politics of citationality. And so that has to do with actually, I did an interview this morning for the Feminist Research Institute on this campus. And in the middle of the interview, I'm citing all of these people. And the young woman, Raquel Perez, who is interviewing me, was like, hey, you're talking about all of these other people. Because I don't come in like on my own steam or by myself. And for me, that practice is part of a community of people who are invested in that work. So that, and then the other, really this is, I wanted to start here as opposed to ending here, but I will end here. I'm accountable to my mother and her dreams for me and her modeling of self-love. My mom passed away in January, and she was an incredible dresser, and this year I have been wearing her clothes. And so, like, everything fashionable about me has to do with inhabiting her actual wardrobe. Not all of it, but the stuff that I could fit and I thought looked cute on me. That seems like such a non-scholarly kind of accountability, except that I have a real deep reverence, I think, is the right word to use for the people who came before me, and not the people who came before me who had lots of authority and power or show up in documentaries, but the people who came before me who literally made it possible for me to be in this place. And I always want to be in alignment and in integrity with what I owe those people, so that I can measure that maybe the things that I'm doing in the world with people that I don't know actually has some kind of some alignment. So I'll stop there.